Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I am Reverend Hector J. Hernandez, and I serve as the Director of Community Engagement for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Today's webinar or conversation continues our 2021 series of webinars and educational training offered by the Prison and Jail Ministries of the National Benevolence Association. During the month of July, the Disciples of Christ Ministries hosted a series of conversations of healing under the title Facing Brokenness, Being Brave Together. These conversations are going to continue in the month of August. And this past Sunday, the MBA was part of an inspiring healing conversation that was centered in community. In today's webinar or conversation titled Broken Systems, we are continuing up to some degree that conversation that began last Sunday. As a group of extraordinary leaders, will reflect upon not just the brokenness of the U.S. corrections system, but also in our collective hopes to change that brokenness, to be agents of healing. As we get started, I would like to inform all of you that this webinar will be recorded and will be available for future viewings at the MBA website at mbacares.org. If you have questions through the webinar, we welcome you to use the Q&A feature by clicking on the icon at the bottom of our screen and to submit your questions. And when you do so, please include your email. And that is because if by any chance we are unable to answer your questions, we want to do so via email, after the webinar is over. Today in this space, as always, it is with us is Reverend Dean Bucalos, who is MBA's Prison and Jail Ministries Mission Specialist and who is the moderator of this conversation. And at this time, I would like to briefly introduce our speakers. And when I say briefly, I mean, all these leaders are doing amazing things. And just by reading their bios, we'll be here for a long time. So in a very brief way, I wanna introduce them. With us today is Brittany Harrington, and she is the peer program coordinator for Pathways in Ashland, Kentucky. She's also the project coordinator of First Day Forward, whose mission is to pair a person living incarceration with a person in sustained recovery to help navigate the reentry process. She has 9 years of experience working in the behavioral health field, including 2 years working with the Department of Community-Based Services START team. With us today is also Marcus Jackson, who is a native from Kentucky and an advocate for criminal justice reform. Marcus joined the ACLU of Kentucky staff in July 2020. And Marcus's passion for criminal justice reform began through personal experiences and witnessing the disparities of the current judicial system and leading to his belief in a more common sense approach to sentencing and the successful reintegration of returning citizens. Let's welcome also Amilcar Valencia, who is the Executive Director of El Refugio. Amilcar is originally from La Libertad, El Salvador, and he has been involved in the immigrant rights movement in the state of Georgia since he arrived in the United States. He has been helping people affected by immigration detention since 2010 and is one of the founding coordinators of El Refugio Hospitality House. And last but not least, Reverend Dr. Heather Honeycutt is with us. She is a licensed professional counselor at Evergreen Counseling and Consulting in Blakesley, Pennsylvania. Heather is an ordained Disciples of Christ clergy and a pastor of Salem United Church of Christ in Pocono Pines, Pennsylvania. Heather served as one of the visionaries for the Georgia Regional Mental Health Initiative in partnership with MBA, and she is currently serving as the facilitator for the MBA Mental Health Equity Cohort. To all of you, welcome, bienvenidos. It is a joy and privilege having all of you here together. And with further ado, I will turn the presentation to our participants, and that will be led by Reverend Dean Bucalos.
Thank you, Hector, and greetings to everyone. Today, we're going to be asking a lot of why questions. Why are our prison and jails and immigration detention centers part of a correction system that is so dysfunctional? Why are we housing those with mental health issues in prisons and jails? Why does there continue to be a disproportionate number of people of color in our jails and prisons and detention centers? How have our immigration detention centers become warehouses of refugees and those simply seeking a better life in the United States? These are important and pressing questions of today. And we realize we've selected an ambitious topic for this afternoon's webinar. And we also realize we can't give it full attention that it needs in the allotted time. So we've addressed these issues in more detail in past webinars, and the links to those will be shared in the chat boxes as we invite you to go to those links on the NBA website for further review after this presentation. So in light of that, we've gathered together panelists today who have professional and personal experience to share with you and to offer positive alternatives to a system of corrections and detention that is badly broken and dysfunctional. And we ask them to invite all of us to find ways to mend these broken systems ourselves as we move toward a process of healing. We're going to focus on three primary areas. First, the mental health context. Second, the prison and jail context. And finally, the immigration detention context. And as noted, there'll be at the end a time for you to ask questions of our panelists. So we're going to begin with the mental health context. In the 1960s, we began the process in our country of deinstitutionalizing people who were in inadequate mental hospitals. Unfortunately, there was serious underfunding of community mental health centers to assist those who were leaving these facilities. In a 2006 special report, the Bureau of Justice Statistics estimated that 705,000 mentally ill adults were incarcerated in state prisons, 78,000 in federal prisons, and 479,000 in local jails. Even more than other areas of health and medicine, the mental health field is plagued by disparities in the availability of and access to its services. That's a quote from the Mental Health Report of the Surgeon General in 1999, who went on to say, consequently, many of the individuals released into the community without support ended up incarcerated. It's fair to say that instead of being deinstitutionalized, a great number of individuals suffering with mental illness were in fact trans-institutionalized into America's jails and prisons. And in 2018, the Bureau of Justice Statistics reported that 14% of prisoners in state and federal facilities met the criteria for having serious mental health issues and conditions. In local jails, the number was 26%. Only 5% of the general population meets those criteria, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. The effect of incarcerating people with mental health concerns is indeed traumatizing. So we're delighted to have Reverend Dr. Heather Honeycutt with us to answer a couple of questions regarding this circumstance and situation. So I'll begin with you, Reverend Honeycutt, to ask, how does incarceration lead to trauma-induced responses, and what are the implications for a person once released from prison or jail who has mental health issues?
Thanks so much. I appreciate all of you being here. I appreciate the invitation to speak on trauma in the incarcerated context. It's a big question. And I think to start, we have to talk about what trauma is. So trauma, in sort of a layman's definition, is any circumstance or set of circumstances which is beyond a person's ability to cope. What traumatizes one person may not traumatize another. There are traumas that people experience in their lives prior to incarceration, during whatever process brings them to incarceration, and while they are incarcerated. So compounded traumas over a lifetime may result in stronger trauma responses. Some trauma responses would include somatic symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, back pain, extreme irritability, nightmares, flashbacks, violent outbursts when triggered, and some other things like desire for control, desire to control everything about one's environment, dissociation or numbing, isolating from others, and so on. So in an incarcerated environment, the prison itself is traumatizing. Just about everything, so I'm a clinician, right? In addition to being a clergy person, just about everything I would want in my therapy office to make my clients comfortable finds its opposite in prison. So think about a therapist's office. You have white noise, soft textures, things to look at that are interesting and somewhat stimulating, a private exchange between two or more people, and a relationship where you experience unconditional positive regard. Now imagine a prison. There is no quiet. There is nothing soft or comfortable. There is no privacy. Corrections officers and other incarcerated persons often treat you poorly. In prison, trauma is leveraged for control. And trauma teaches our brains to protect ourselves from everyone and everything that is a potential threat. So what happens in the brain in response to these threats is kind of shorthand for this. The limbic system, which tells your brain what's going on around you, notices a threat. And when it notices a threat, it goes into overdrive. So if the limbic system is responsible for alerting you to danger, when it senses that danger, it causes our sympathetic nervous system to flood the body with adrenaline and other neurochemicals, which ignites the fight, flight, freeze, flock response. This is normal and healthy, but it is meant to function acutely and for short periods of time. In an incarcerated environment, the system is always working. It overfunctions, right? And so the limbic system begins to register anything that smacks of the traumatic event as a threat. When it does that, no matter how innocuous, the body is again flooded over and over with neurochemicals. So people start having trauma reactions to anything that is remotely like the previously traumatizing experience, which causes all the symptoms that we talked about earlier, irritability, dissociation, desire for control, etc., to spring up, and the person is living in that space all the time. So imagine you're about to get in a car accident. You feel your heart beating, your pulse is racing, you feel like you need to do something. And typically, when the risk is gone, we don't feel that way anymore. But when our limbic system is chronically overactivated, we feel like that all of the time. So if you can imagine feeling that fear that you feel when you're almost, blindsided by another vehicle, being in that space all of the time. And that is the reality of the incarcerated environment for a great many people. That said, even when services are provided in an incarcerated context, it is nearly impossible to heal from trauma while you are still in a traumatizing environment. So even when folks receive therapeutic services, they're not really meant to heal trauma, right? Because the overall goal of prison is to maintain control and keep the peace. So people are often leaving the incarcerated context much more traumatized than they were when they entered. So now imagine leaving that environment. The system, your limbic system, still sees everyone and everything as a threat that doesn't just turn off when you walk out of the doors of the prison. If it's quiet, you're in danger because your system hasn't known quiet and doesn't know how to respond to it. Again, everyone and everything is a potential threat. Your brain hasn't changed because your brain is still trying to keep you alive. So we're releasing folks back into the outside world who are, generally speaking, much more traumatized than they were when they went into prison, who have been punished and further traumatized but not rehabilitated, who have experienced injustices compounded upon injustices, and whose brains function less like healthy brains in response to threat than before. So when we talk about people leaving an incarcerated environment and staying out of it, we need to talk about what we do to heal trauma after it has occurred in that small space between when a person has left the incarcerated environment and before anything happens to get them back in it or into other more traumatizing situations.
Thank you, Heather. We know that continually there are a number of people with mental health issues that are directed into our jails and prisons, and particularly our jails and local communities. And so what I'm hearing you say is that the effect of incarceration is exacerbated for people who have mental health issues. So we want to talk about possible solutions. We want to talk about ways in which things can be done better and outcomes can be improved. In your professional opinion, what may be the alternatives to the current ways in which we're dealing with those with mental health issues who are brought into the criminal justice system?
Yeah, thank you. So I would say first and foremost, we need to increase access to mental health care before mental illness escalates into mental health crisis, right? If we are screening earlier, if we are increasing access, if there are community mental health centers that are staffed and funded in the community, then we can help keep folks out of an incarcerated environment to keep that level of traumatization down. Second, I would say we can decouple crisis response from policing, right? Police are not trained, most of them, in crisis response. There are some pilot projects, one in Portland, one in New York City, where folks who are in a mental health crisis can instead be responded to by mental health professionals. And I think in the years to come, access to those programs will grow. And I certainly hope that they do, because it looks like, at least from preliminary results, that we're keeping folks out of prison and less in danger than they would be if police were responding to such calls. We'd say offer real services focused on recovery within an incarcerated context and provided by trained and licensed mental health professionals. At least in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in our state system, most mental health services are provided by bachelor's level folks who are not trained in counseling, right? They just have a degree in a human services field. It would be helpful to train corrections staff in nonviolent de-escalation. The amount of violence that takes place in these one-up, one-down relationships between corrections officers and incarcerated persons is staggering and drastically underreported. And so if what we know is staggering, I can't even imagine what we don't know. Lowering the staff to incarcerated person ratio within existing facilities, of course, is just in line with offering more personalized services. It also would help to keep those who are more vulnerable, that is, those who have mental health conditions within the incarcerated context, away from the incarcerated persons who are more predatory. And so it would keep lots more folks safe. Of course, I would say release those who are incarcerated for non-violent offenses and drug-related offenses to increase space in our prisons, which are, again, drastically overcrowded, which would also help with the previous point, which would be to lower incarcerated person to staff ratio. And finally, I think deprivatizing prisons where there is some real oversight, or at least more oversight and accountability within the federal and state justice systems, would be a wonderful step in helping those who are incarcerated overall, and especially those who are incarcerated with mental health conditions.
Thank you, Reverend Hunnicutt, for giving us a word of hope. And I see that there are a couple of questions. We'll get to those questions at the end. So if you have other questions for Reverend Hunnicutt, please put those in the question and answer area in the video area below the presentations. We now move to our second category, prison and jail context. There are 3 million people in jail and prison today in the United States. It far outpaces the population growth and crime. We know that between 1980 and 2015, the number of people incarcerated increased from roughly 500,000 to 2.2 million. Despite making up close to 5% of the global population, the United States is nearly 25% of the world's prison population. 32% of the United States population is represented by African Americans and Hispanics, compared to 56% of the United States incarcerated population represented by the same African Americans and Hispanics. So I want to address the next couple of questions to Brittany Harrington and Marcus Jackson. So to both of you, each of you have been incarcerated in your lives and now work with people who've been incarcerated. In your opinion, why are there so many people of color incarcerated today?
What I've experienced and what I've personally seen in communities of color and disadvantaged communities as a whole is that it's police different. When you look at more police presence, certain ways of life, just cultures is being criminalized. And as Dr. Hunnicutt spoke about the actual incarceration, being inside, the trauma that you're exposed to during that. And then when you come home, it's almost like a void there if you don't have this dysfunction, if you don't have these type of controls placed into your life, and it's hard for you to actually maintain out here. I know after returning on a personal level, it was very difficult. You're basically treated like a child. You have zero control over your life. While you're incarcerated, you come home, and as a man, you want to be in control of your own, I'm tired of people telling me what to do. I'm tired of you standing on my back. And then the lack of opportunity, the lack of resources. It's easy to resort back to what you used to do, how you used to live, the crimes that you committed. It's almost like muscle memory. It's like when you're fatigued and you don't know anything to do mentally, you just kick in and go into that 100% survival mode. It's like, I got to do whatever I got to do to make it. And before long, you're caught in these revolving doors of back and forth, incarceration. And no one ever asked the question of like, why are you doing this? Or how can we help you not do this? It's always, you're a horrible person. And if anyone that actually knows me, they know, I'm far from a horrible person, but it's hard to get out of that cycle. And it's like, a lot of people say the system is broken. In so many aspects, I feel like the system is working exactly as it was designed to work. And I'm gonna pass it to Brittany before I just get too deep into that.
I know. Thank you, Marcus. And thanks everybody for letting me talk. I told everybody before this, like all the chaos and the destruction and the harm I caused to my family, my community, it's a blessing to be able to like kind of mend some of that by doing this, by talking about this, by keeping this a topic of discussion. But there's a huge disparity in population and incarceration with minority populations. And I 100% agree with Marcus. Policing is definitely an issue. The way these minority populations are policed are completely different. When you are, and just a quick example, I'm a white woman from in poverty. I was raised in poverty, grew up in poverty, never had a hired attorney, navigated that criminal justice system and received my sentence. But I was also incarcerated with an African-American woman who was within years of the same age, who had identical background to mine, who was sentenced to 3 years longer than I was, and then got a 12-month deferment. So I was released to treatment after a year, and she was sentenced to another year. And we were identical on paper, other than the color of our skin. We can say maybe that doesn't involve race, but it's likely it does, because it's not the only scenario or situation that you see while you're incarcerated. Another thing I'd like to point out, Marcus, and you can probably attest to this, is what we're seeing where I live is a generational mistrust in systems with minority populations. Okay, so we need to get treatment centers and resources and support into these communities. They don't trust those systems because those systems have failed minority populations for so long. It failed their parents and their grandparents and their grandparents' parents. Or they didn't have access to that. So we want minority populations to heal and to grow and to flourish. Those systems either aren't there or there's a lack of trust in those systems. So coupled with just how they're generally treated differently, period, by law enforcement officers, the judicial system, and definitely while incarcerated.
Thank you both. We do know that the failed war on drugs is one of the causations for the disproportionate number of people of color who've been incarcerated. That's now being acknowledged statistically, that more emphasis would be being placed in communities of color by police enforcement with respect to drug use. And we also now know that there's not any disparity between drug use among Anglos and people of color. That's now recognized as being equal. So there's obviously an impact on the enforcement of drug laws in areas that are primarily populated by people of color. And I think we now realize that that's one of the reasons why there's, among many reasons, but that's one of the reasons why there's a disproportionate number of people of color now incarcerated, and we have this concept of mass incarceration. I want to move to the reentry part of that, and I'm going to address this next question to Brittany, because she works primarily with people who are in that process of reentering from places of incarceration, prison and jail. So to you, Brittany, while in prison and jail, what's being done to assist people to be successful upon leaving places of incarceration?
Well, I took some time before this started to write down my experience. I've re-entered society from 4 different institutions in the state of Kentucky. Now, in Kentucky, county jails are licensed to house an inmate with a 10-year sentence or under. So they can possibly keep, and they get paid to keep these. Now, every other inmate that's not a state sentenced inmate, the county bites that cost. They have to pay for that inmate. So they're incentivized to keep these people for many, many years. I just want to make that known. So while incarcerated, I've been incarcerated a little over 2 years of my adult life between sentences. And I took the time to write down how many services I received while in jail. And mind you, the whole time that I was incarcerated, every time I went to jail, I have a very, very, very serious drug addiction. And every time I'd go to jail and I would sober up, I wanted to do different every single time. Not one time did I go and say, all right, this is cool, I like this. Every time I went, I'm like, okay, this time it's going to be different. I'm going to make changes in my life and I'm going to heal and I'm going to do different. I'm not going to use drugs anymore. But despite that motivation, this is how many services I was offered. 2 years. 2 years. One time I was released at 4 o'clock in the morning in Greenup County, Kentucky. And that is where I live. And there is nothing there but a Speedway and McDonald's. And neither one of those were open at 4 o'clock in the morning at that time. Never did anyone sit down and ask me what I wanted to do with my life or what my plans for the future was. Never did anyone offer me education on how to create a resume or how to attain insurance or get a job or go back to school. Those services simply weren't offered. The only means of hope that I got the entire time during any of my stays was a job that I secured in a kitchen with the other inmates in one institution, and then a couple of church ladies that come in and let us smell like humans for a little bit because they brought some perfume and they brought song lyrics in and let us sing and be normal. So despite how good my intentions were every time, I had no knowledge of what to do when I got out. My family's not healthy pictures of progressive success. You know, I come from a family who struggled and they didn't even know how to navigate life in a healthy way. So I like that. I read an article many years ago, and it was a guy who was writing about his illness, his mental illness. And he said, my drug addiction and mental illness lie dormant while incarcerated. I am the same person going in as I come out, and my disease is still there. It's just dormant. I don't get to act on it, right? I don't get to go out and use, but I'm not any different. And I'm doing this over and over and over. In my opinion, you have a captive audience. They're captive. What little information you provide, they have to absorb because they're captive, and we are providing nothing. I mean, you could slip brochures under a cell door and everyone would read it because you don't get reading material, and that would influence, but we are doing nothing. So I know that these places, especially county institutions, now prison have funding sources that are greater, and they do get to offer a little more, but still it's incredibly minimal. I looked up something before this, and 300 plus people were released from institutions in Kentucky on July 2nd. 300 plus people released with nothing. I mean, that's powerful. They were the same people leaving as they went in. And the large majority of them are just like me. They don't want to be like that. They don't want to keep going back and they want good lives. They want to be good parents and good children. And they're not being taught. Did I answer the question?
Yes, thanks for sharing, Brittany. Yes, you did. And you and Marcus both described for us what many of us realize is a broken system, that the outcomes are not what people hope. The recidivism rates are between 40 and 50% in most places across the country. That means 1 out of 2 people, basically, once they're released, will be back in prison or jail within 3 years. That doesn't seem to be a very positive outcome to me. And some of that is because of some of the things that you all have mentioned, as well as some of the factors that Reverend Hunnicutt mentioned as well. So in our desire to try to move forward and find solutions and better outcomes, I'm going to ask both you and Marcus, so how could outcomes of high recidivism be reduced? I mean, what, in your opinions, because this is your area, what could be done to break the cycle of incarceration, release, reincarceration? And I'll start with Marcus, and then we'll come back to Brittany.
Well, thanks, Nate. There's several things that can be done. But one of the things, and I was sorry, I got distracted after reading in the chat. Someone spoke about de-escalation in the chat, and that in Indiana, people are trained. I think one of the first issues with the Department of Corrections whether you're trained in de-escalation or not, is that what is your job? Are you there to correct, punish, and is it authoritarian, or are you there to try to help people grow? Is it more social work related? I think a lot of the problems with correctional officials is that you have to balance that. What is my purpose? What is my true purpose of being here? And then it also goes back to a lot of the things with when a person comes in. Kentucky specific, it's based on the amount of time that you have, the amount of programs that you can also take. So in my personal situation, I was given a mandatory 10-year sentence. To be in certain programs, you had to be within 4 years of serving out, or that means completing your sentence, or seeing the parole board. So for 6 years, you want me to live any way that I want to. But then in the final 4 years, you know what, you're going to get me together. You're going to start rehabilitating me. I think the approach in itself is so hypocritical. And one of the things, some of the work that we're doing is like trying to help people re-enter, make things a little easier. One of the ID campaigns that we started was like people getting out have a hard time to just simply have an ID to get housing, to find jobs, different things like that. A small thing. With that program and the people that I talk to inside, that trauma, going all the way back to the trauma, that trauma makes them feel like you've never cared enough about me. What's the catch to this ID? So the thought inside is that you're giving us these IDs so that our parole officers can track us, because the parole officers aren't seen. The system isn't seen to be there to help us grow and overcome the traumas that we're faced. It's always this us against them mentality when it comes to staff, when it comes to those incarcerated. It's us against them. So to make any type of headway in there, we first have to eliminate that us against them mentality that flows both ways. So de-escalation is a start, but we still protect our brothers and sisters in blue and put them before those in khaki or green or whatever uniform color of the uniform it is that individuals wear. And at the end of the day, we're all in there together. Everyone is faced with those same conditions, whether you get to go home at the end of the night or not. For that shift, you are basically an inmate with a few more perks, but you don't see yourselves as that. So to me, that would be like the first starting point. It's like when you first come in, let's start rehabilitation. Let's start finding out what the individual needs. What's your dream? My dream was never to be locked up, to use drugs, or that wasn't my dream as a child. So let's get back to that. Let's get people back to that, rather than feeling like my job is to break you, to keep my foot on your throat. Thank you.
I'm there. I love, we don't ever ask what motivates you. That question alone could solve a million of our queries. But if you think about what a person needs to be successful, it's like really basic. They need food, they need a home, they need a source of income, they need a sense of purpose, and they need support. And we're doing nothing to build those things. Like if we could just focus on building a person's source of income, providing that person with a trade or an education or a skill, or like Marcus said, we work on an ID campaign, and things are changing in Kentucky because we're harassing for change, but providing people with the things they need to even secure employment, an ID, a birth certificate, and a social security card. Mind you, every time I've got out a booking, it's like a mystery where one shoe goes, but you have nothing and only one shoe half the time when you get out. They disappear somewhere. But giving someone just the things that they need to get a food stamp card or a Medicaid card. They need support. They need fellowship from people who understand them. And more importantly, they need a sense of purpose. It'd be amazing if someone asked you, what do you want to do? What's your dream? Okay, you want to go back to college. How do you do that? What do you do first? Marcus didn't say it, but he said it. Reentry should start. Planning for reentry should start the date you're incarcerated. Why would you send somebody in corrections is not correct. Reform is not correct. None of that happens. Nothing is corrected. Nothing is reformed. You are the same person coming out as going in with probably a little more trauma and a few poor connections. But if we stick to the basics, you have a captive audience that are thirsty for knowledge, thirsty for goodness, thirsty for education. We're missing the mark. And I can speak from experience in Kentucky, but I'm almost certain that we could improve all of our federal prison systems.
Thank you both. And I'm going to give a shout out to one of the NBA affiliates, Mission Behind Bars and Beyond, which is a mentoring program that works with people while they're incarcerated and connects them with a group of outside citizens who form a mentoring group for them to help and make that transition from being incarcerated to coming back into the community, that support that Brittany is talking about, so that the transition that Marcus has referenced can be so traumatic is eased by having people who can help you navigate the waters of reentry. More and more people can get involved who are in the community to work with folks who are incarcerated and coming back into our community to make that transition a lot smoother. And we can do that in our churches. That's a good place for us to start. Thank you both. I'm going to move to our third topic, the immigration detention context. So since 2016, there's been a spike in the number of people detained in our immigration detention facilities, reaching over 40,000 people. Many are detained in private detention facilities. People are isolated, they're separated from their families. For years, Congress has been discussing the need to reform our immigration policies, but little has been done and very little has occurred to remedy a system that is acknowledged now as being broken. The immigration and detention operations in the United States cost more than $2.5 billion a year. So I'm going to ask Amilcar a couple of questions that are related to this. First, in your experience working with folks and their families who interact with the immigration detention programs in the United States. What effect has our present immigration policy had on the well-being of families?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity again to talk about this important issue. I would say to begin with that, the detention issues or the problems that, or the panelists have discussed in terms of what happened in prisons, what happened in jails, also happened in detention centers. And we who, been working with people detained by immigration have seen the horrors of this detention and mass deportation system. I will take on what Marcus said before, and to begin just saying that the system is not broken. The immigration detention system is working as designed to keep people from entering the country, to expel those who are undesired, to exploit them when needed, but then deport then in masses. So this system has been created and designed in this way to allow certain people to come here legally, but those who are majority from poor countries or developing countries, as has been called, are often had less opportunities to come here, and that's one of the biggest issues that we have faced. This has historical context as well. The root causes of migrations have not been addressed by nations across the globe, and especially what happened in Latin America. The involvement of U.S. foreign policy, for example, has created many of these issues, and that's why people have migrated, in the last decades. The system, as I said, is detaining people who are seeking protection in the United States, women, children, people who have been victims of or targeted by gang criminal activities in Central America, groups in other countries, people who are forced to leave their homelands due to war and other deep issues that people experience in their homelands. Those are the individuals that are coming to the United States today. And we know that the conditions inside of the detention centers are inhumane, are deplorable, and people face retaliation if they speak out. And there are many, many issues that people face while detained in this detention system. As I said, it's designed to kind of channel as many people as possible, as you had mentioned at the beginning, Dim, to deport them. And is not a problem of the last 4 years. It definitely has increased, but has been an issue over the last couple of decades in the United States. Just an over increase on spending to put more people in detention, to expansion of detention beds is an issue that we have experienced since 1996 in the United States. What are the effects of this on families? I'll put an example. We work with people who have a hospitality house nearby the detention center. We have hosted many people who visit their loved ones, families who travel many miles to get to the detention center. Some of them, 8 hours or more from the Carolinas to get to the Stewart Detention Center, which is in a very remote rural area, as it is the case for many detention centers. And it's the case also for other prisons as well, isolated, located in far and remote places where there is no resources. We started visiting people in 2010 and open a hospitality house so families can come and stay with us. And through that experience, we have come to know families and accompany them through their process, assist them as much as we can to just to be present with them, to listen in their stories. And there are a few that stand up to me, just if because the time doesn't allow to show more. But we had a family who were traveling every other week to visit their loved ones to Stewart Detention Center in Georgia. Um, so they made a 600 miles journey every other week to visit the father of the kids. Um, they visited for, I believe, a period for like about 6 months at the detention center. So every other week they were visiting. Then they became, very close to our volunteers, to our coordinators. Um, my family, my wife and I have a son who is now 6 years old, and they also had a son. So they got together and they were like, my friend is coming to visit, or they formed that relationship among themselves. Um, uh, that was something good, that happened, that while they were going through this very difficult moment and experience in their life of having their loved ones detained and not knowing that what is going to happen in their case and potentially be deported, that there was this place, this house that offering some comfort, and there was people there who were offering friendship and support. Sadly, the dad was deported, and the two kids are here separated without their father. Um, they are separated miles away. They are going to grow without their father because our immigration detention system, the trauma that causes on kids is in many instances irreparable, because especially in the early years of development, the kids needs to have the support of father and mother is possible, right? That's what many has said. Those who study psychology and child development, how important it is to have kids growing with their parents. That's what our immigration detention system is doing, is separating family, is separating kids. These kids, although might have the opportunity to in the future travel and visit them in their country of origin, they are going to carry that burden of being separated from their family. I personally, I'm an immigrant myself. My family came to the United States. My mom came here during the Civil War in El Salvador. So I know by experience how hard it is to grow up without a parent, and we are depriving a lot of people, a lot of kids from that right to to feel safe and protected by their loved ones. Um, we had deported in the last years more than 2 million people, and this administration continues to deport hundreds of people every day. So is that's just the trauma that carry on families. And I would say also, another example that I'll put always, people who already been traumatized by their own experience, either in their homelands, in their home countries, and come here seeking protection and hopefully the opportunity to stay in the United States, are re-traumatized in detention because of that experience that they lived in detention, because of the um, uh, the neglect, the abuse, the inhumane conditions in detention, and potentially with the looming deportation. So even, this is a person that I met in detention whose brother was targeted by the gangs. Were working together with the church, doing some survey in the community in Central America, and they were taken by suspicious by gang members because they were doing this service in the community, about what is it the church that can do to support them, how the church can support communities in terms of to feel more safety and other opportunities for development. So they were targeted by gang members. They disappeared the brother. They later found the brother that was murdered, and the family didn't have any alternative but sent him to the United States. He came to the United States, told his story, had proof, letters from the bishops and letters from government officials, police report, and evidence that his brother was murdered, still was not believed and was sent to the same reality that he was fleeing from. So this is the system that we have now, that deports people who are seeking protection, people who've been here for a long time, that have built their life here, that are members of churches, community, that are doing everything to support their loved ones, their families, and yet are still targeted by immigration and customs enforcement because they were, have irregular status or crossed without inspection, or they had other issues with immigration in the past, and this is definitely inhumane, and is deplorable, the conditions where the immigrants have to face, especially when they are taken into custody in immigration detention centers.
Thank you, Amilcar. And I know you have an opinion about the effect of the privatization of immigration detention centers, that many people don't realize that the government has contracts that guarantee a certain number of beds for each of these privatized detention centers. So much like Brittany was talking about, the county jails have an incentive to maintain a certain population. We have immigration detention centers like the one in George the Stewart Detention Center, which is a private facility. They have an incentive to try to house a certain number of people. You've certainly shared with us the brokenness of the system. I want to flip that over and ask you, who've been working in this area for so long, how this system can be changed to be more humane. I'm sure you've thought about that, Amilcar. We would appreciate hearing about your thoughts with respect to that.
Thank you, Dean. And just a word about privatization. I think, yes, today, more than 70, I believe it's close to 80% of the people who are incarcerated by immigration are in a private facility. So there is also an incentive from these corporations to, keep detaining more people. And then there is, they have so much power to lobby in Congress and local legislators to pass laws and ordinances. So there is more people incarcerated by immigration because it benefits their shareholders. About how the system can be better, or can we actually make a system, immigration detention system, better? I think because I work with, we work with people who are detained, and because we know, the effects of the system. I mean, detention center, and talking about the COVID reality today, at the detention center that we work with, 4 people had died for COVID at this facility. People are placed in solitary confinement when they have mental health issues. People are placed in solitary confinement if they complain. People are attacked by guards if they have some sort of peaceful protest to demand them to be treated like a human, like a person. So that's documented. I mean, we created a report. I'm happy to put the link in a minute here for everyone to read it, about those conditions and the neglect that happen inside of detention centers. And because the lives of people are in danger, and because we have known the families who are impacted, I sustain that the system, or the detention system, as it is, cannot be reformed, and we just need to dismantle this system that incarcerates people. We need to dismantle immigration and customs enforcement, this agency that has so much power, and that is causing so much pain in immigrant communities across the United States. Those are, I think, the general thoughts on what is needs to be done. So in order to the immigration system as a whole to be a more welcoming and more giving opportunities to people, these are some of the things that I was thinking about it. One, we need to release people from detention, especially with the conditions that we are seeing at Stewart, for example. There's detention that I work, but other detention centers. Stewart, for example, has the highest rates of COVID infection. 4 people have died already in the last year for COVID-related conditions. 4 people died between 2017 and 2020. So even before the pandemic, there were so many deaths at the detention center. There's rampant neglect and abuse. I think in general, I think we need to advocate for phasing out immigration detention centers and ending contracts with facilities like Stewart that has all these conditions and the inhumane treatment that people lived. How we do that? Reducing funding for immigration beds, and that's something that this administration can do. Another thing that we need to do is ending the detention at the border and stop criminalizing asylum seekers. We, in experience in the last few days or weeks, is that people are detained at the border. CBP, Customs Border Patrols, transfer people to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Those people are sent to different detention centers and then later released in the interior. It is not need to traumatize and keep traumatizing asylum seekers and people who are seeking protection. So just releasing people upon crossing and asking for protection, even not taking them into custody, but allowing them a process that is humane and allow them to go to their families and communities while they continue a process. We need to fight for a path for citizenship for undocumented persons already in the United States. And we need to recommit as a country to welcome more refugees. I mean, as I said, our foreign policy has created many of the issues in around the world, and we need to take some of that burden as well and recommit to welcome refugees and immigrants, and eliminate the root causes of migration. That's something that we haven't done much even in the recent years. So we need to do that. In the meantime, while all these policies are created as we release people and as we phase out immigration detention, these are the things that I think we need to do in order to protect those who are currently in detention. So end the use of solitary confinement, release people who got high risk conditions, especially those who are high risk for COVID. Increase the staffing in medical units to respond the requests and care of those individuals who need treatment. Stop transfer from other detention centers. That's how COVID gets into the facility as well, because people have been transferred from many places across the country. Increase cleaning and other practices according to the CDC, and provide meals that are actually comply with national nutritional standards. People who have diabetes, people who have other conditions are often served regular meals, and especially people when we have particular experiences with people that we work with, that people with diabetes are given a lot of pasta, applesauce, pancakes and syrup. So that's something. So those are the I think my cleaning list for the things to do while we work for kind of phasing out this detention system.
Thank you, Amilcar, and thanks everyone for their insights and their input and giving us a word of hope about possibilities of ways in which things can be changed and made better, and healing can come from this brokenness that we have in our systems of corrections and immigration detention. There are a couple of questions I want to take a few minutes and address those. One of the questions that I think is probably addressed toward Reverend Honeycutt and Brittany and Marcus. What are your thoughts on community-based admissions to recovery houses? So what we're seeing, I think behind this question is what we're seeing now is more people being released from places of incarceration while they're still under the supervision of corrections into recovery centers. What are your thoughts about the effectiveness of that?
I'll go first. I am a product of an early release to a recovery center. Thank God, while I was there, I was taught what I needed to do to change my life and to succeed. I do think it leaves a large population of people that are incarcerated out. In order to get into a recovery center, you have to have a substance use diagnosis. So you've got your people who suffer from mental illness, and you have your people that aren't necessarily have a qualifying diagnosis of drug dependence, who still need help transitioning out and navigating reentries. So while I support it, and I think more early release options like that integrate community support and education are great, I still think we're missing some people. So it needs to be wider spread, wider focused.
And I'll follow up on that. It's a step in the right direction, but I know for a lot of people of color, it's a spit in the face because we're not offered the same opportunities at the same rates. And what's so problematic about the whole situation for me is that why is there the need for incarceration to begin with? If we have these services already at our disposal and you see that they're working and the impact that it's having, why aren't people being sent to treatment before incarceration? And you know, I would love to see us get to that point where we're bringing those numbers down to people that should never be in prison to begin with, and have them in the appropriate treatment. And then that will bring a lot of people more, put a lot of more trust and faith back into the system, especially when it's across the board, when you have people of all diversities across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with Brittany and Marcus. And I think for me as a clinician, where I come down is you're still making mental health professionals part of the system, right? So baked into our system of incarceration, our system of government, are inherent inequalities that we have accepted for a very long time, right? And in releasing people to recovery programs, you're now making mental health clinicians, what Marcus said about us versus them, that push-pull is still there, right? So I become, as a clinician, I become a them. How can I really help? How can people really trust me as a clinician? Am I on their side? Are people going to believe that when they know that I have to report to their PO? Are they ever going to believe me? Are they ever going to hear what I say and believe that I'm for them and with them? And if that doesn't happen, recovery is almost impossible, right? You can want to recover, but if you don't have someone who believes in you, it would be nigh on impossible to do the hard and holy work that is required, not just the work that's in you, right? But the work that is still contra to the community in which you often live, right? Because recovery is a whole new way of learning. It's a whole new way of life. And if folks don't know that I'm on their side, if I've become an agent of the state in that way, I'm not sure that overall the program could ever be fully successful.
Thank you all. I've got one other question for any one of you. So for people in the pews, people in our congregations, pastors in our churches, what can they do? What can be done? creating a more welcoming community, legislative advocacy, speaking up? What are your recommendations for the person listening who's living in a community, and how can they become part of the solution?
I will jump in there because it's something that I have been working on. And when I'm speaking, our faith leaders have always been like the pillars of our community. You know, they were the people that, you know, you go to, you can kind of like let your guard down. And through time, and it's like they've separated themselves from us. They started to cast judgment on us. You know, it's like, you know, I'm not going over there and mess with them people because they'll put my life in danger. No, you're respected. You're not going to be in danger in those communities where you most need it. So I'm trying to bring pastors in to you know, rebuild that to be those pillars again. You know, get rid of the judgment. Come in, listen, open your arms, accept it. You know, you don't have to agree with what the individual is doing out there, but there is a reason behind why that individual is doing what they are doing. And I really feel like a lot of times when it comes to your faith and religious leaders, that we are more open to have the conversations with them, but we're not going to have the conversation with them if we feel like you're judging us and condemning us the whole time. So just be there, be in community, listen, embrace people, pull people in instead of pushing people away.
I'd like to say the basics, and I got it written down here. People need purpose, they need support, they need a source of income, they need a home, and they need food. So pick your poison, churches. How would you like to help? Because those are all the things people need to be successful. And I mean, our churches are, like Marcus said, I mean, they're everything. They're never changing. They're always there. The building's there, and people with good hearts are there. So, I mean, there's a huge impact churches can play. The most humane part of all my stays in jail, the most humane part was those two sweet church ladies that were just kind to us, that treated us like humans. It was humane for that hour they were there every 2 weeks. It was humanity. And that can be really impactful, to be treated like a human when you're kind of caged like an animal for so long.
I can say real quick that not just in the immigration context, but people of faith are not just called to action. I think we are mandated to welcome the stranger, to visit those who are in prison. Matthew 25. So as Brittany said, pick the thing that you wanted to do. It is imperative for people of faith to be welcoming, accepting, accompanying, not to save people's life, not to be the superhero, but to be present to people, to treat the other as a human being, as a person, and of course advocate for change, for opportunities for people. When people are released from jails and detention centers, there are many needs that need to be met. Accompany them through their journey, and take action. I mean, there are things that can contacting your members of Congress, and especially with immigration, especially that is something that is being talked about in Congress these days. Take action and educate yourself if you don't know much about it. And there are many ministries, many opportunities to serve, like visitation, as Brittany said. Like there is many opportunities there to accompany people and to be present to them, and as well advocating to end these systems that are meant to keep people apart and to dehumanize individuals. And people of faith are called to welcome people, to treat people as they are, as a human being.
So I would just echo everything these folks have said. You know, as a clergy person, I think the most difficult thing is to continue to let your heart be broken over and over. And it's very easy to want to shield ourselves from the pain of the world, particularly once we achieve a certain education, a certain position. And that's not the call of Christ. That's not the call of the Christian life. And so, you know, if we can hear the stories of the folks who are talking to us about their experiences, I think that is a first step in being moved toward action, but it's not enough. And so, you know, to echo what Brittany said, pick something and do it. It doesn't really matter what, but the need is there in your community.
Thank you all. And I want to thank you all for sharing this afternoon. It was wonderful. And I certainly appreciate all the good things that you're doing in the places where you are, but also for your willingness to take the time out to share with us. I'm going to turn it back over to Reverend Hernandez, who will wrap it up for us.
Oof, wow. Yeah, I have to echo Dean's word by thanking you, giving thanks to all the panelists, and yeah, that ends our webinar today. We are thankful for all of you who were willing to spend some time with us today. This webinar, like I shared at the beginning, will be available soon on our webpage, mbacares.org. And we ask you to share these resources with your congregation, with friends. And the same way, if any of these topics, I don't know, pique your curiosity or your imagination, I'm inviting you to go to our Prison and Jail Ministries, to the section within our website of Prison and Jail Ministries, because we have many other resources available. We have other webinars that we have hosted, and we have all kind of resources that can help you and your community and your congregation to keep exploring and hopefully to move people into action. So for more information, like I said, about Prison and Jail Ministries, but also about other ministries and excellent work that the MBA is doing, please visit us as mbacare.org. And that's it for today. Thank you, and many blessings to all of you.